You may think you know all there is to know about what it's like to be a teacher, but how true are your perceptions about salaries, workload, and dealing with bad behaviour? Let's bust some myths about teaching in this episode of Future You. Hello and welcome to Future You, the podcast from graduate careers experts Prospects. We're here to help you achieve your career goals. My name's Dan Mason, and in this episode we're going to take a deep dive into what it's really like to be a teacher. My guests, Freya Hemming, who is looking forward to starting her teaching career, and Zaid Khaliq, who has been a teacher and is now an Explore teaching advisor, talk through the big questions around salaries, workload, dealing with bad behaviour in the classroom, the rewards of being a teacher, and much more. And I think this is a really helpful discussion for those of you who are considering this career path, and perhaps even some of you who haven't thought of teaching as an option for you until now. Don't forget to subscribe to Future You in your podcast app, and head to prospects.ac.uk for more careers advice. But for now, let's get straight into my conversation with Freya and Zaid. I'm joined for this episode by Freya Hemming, a brand ambassador for Get Into Teaching, and also by Zaid Khaliq, who is a former teacher himself and an Explore teaching advisor. Welcome to you both.
Thanks you for having us.
Great to speak to you both. Before we get into the main bit of this conversation, which is going to be about careers in teaching and busting a few myths about that, if we start with a bit of context about both of your backgrounds, starting with you, Zaid. If we can, tell us a little bit about your own career in teaching, how you got into teaching, what subjects you taught, what age group, that kind of thing.
Sure. Hi everyone. So my name is Zaid Khaliq. I've been a teacher for about 10 years, just over 10 years. So my route into teaching was a bit atypical, I'd say, in that I went into teaching after graduating from university because I didn't know what else to do at the time. So I had a friend who was a teacher, and he kind of suggested that I consider teaching, just for the year. I think at the time there was a bit of a bursary going on, and it was, I think, it's £7,000. And when I looked at prospects at the time, I thought, it's not such a bad idea. So I kind of decided to go ahead. I applied. I was successful in my application, and then I completed the training year. It was a very kind of interesting experience for me, not least because the two placements that I had were very, very different. So one of the placements I did was in a further education college. I was in a situation where I was teaching students that were older than me. I taught the foundation degree course there, and somebody who just left university, that was a bit of a unique experience. But one thing I would say, the challenges at that time were obviously things like the academic side, because you're teaching quite a high level, but it was a very interesting way to kind of experience the profession, because there weren't any real behavioral challenges, so to speak, because I was dealing with obviously more able kind of and more mature students. The second placement was the complete opposite. It was an inner city school. The students really didn't want to learn there, and so behavioral challenges were very, very high. So it's a very end-to-end spectrum kind of different kind of challenges in both of those kind of placements. Fast forward, started my first teaching job, and I think by the end of my first year, it was something that I couldn't see myself do anything other than. I really enjoyed my first year of teaching. I built some very great relationship with the students that I taught, and from that point onwards, it was something that I wanted to continue on with. I taught in the UK. I continued for about 3 years. I taught in an inner city school in Birmingham. Again, there was a lot of challenges around behaviour, because the area where I taught was a bit deprived. So students came from, challenging kind of backgrounds. But that experience was, very rewarding, in that when I was able to work with those students and help them, achieve academic success, it was a very rewarding experience. Fast forward, I then applied to go to teach overseas. I ended up teaching in Dubai for about 7 years. All the while it was science, but obviously different disciplines in science. But yeah, that kind of sums up my career.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that. And how about yourself, Freya? What inspired you to become a brand ambassador for Get Into Teaching? Is teaching something that you're considering for your career?
Yeah, so at this time when I got approached by Get Into Teaching, I was currently doing my application. So I'm currently a student in Nottingham, but next year I'm hoping to move back home. And I've got a provisional place at Newman University in Birmingham to study. I want to teach geography at secondary schools. So it's always been something in the back of my mind. Always considered teaching. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to submit the application, see how it goes. And then I was actually on campus one day, and in the student union they had like the Get Into Teaching stall, and you always get approached at these events, and it was like, are you considering teaching? And for once I was like, actually, yeah, I am. So I actually spoke to another Get Into Teaching advisor at the event, and he gave me some other advice. Obviously got my freebies as well from the event, and yeah, and then one of the girls at the end approached me and said, oh, we haven't got a brand ambassador for the University of Nottingham yet. Would you consider it? And I was a bit like, sure, like what does it entail as such? And it's basically just spreading the word on campus about teaching, doing social media engagement and, hosting 2 events per term. So yeah, that's basically how I got into it, and it's been the perfect student job. Really been, I can able balance my studies and everything, and learn more about teaching, and yeah, it's been really good. So
That's great. Thanks very much for that. So we've got a bit of an introduction to both of you there. Let's move into the main part of this, which is, so we're going to try and tackle a few of the myths that that surround careers in teaching, maybe. So if we start by going to you again, Freya, maybe if you want to sort of introduce us to some of the common myths that people may have about teaching and what they might be.
I think that's probably quite a big worry, that the salary isn't amazing and maybe you're working a lot more than a typical job. I think that's probably the main thing, yeah. And then apart from that, maybe other myths about teachers only work 8 a.m. till 3 p.m. or like the school day, like that's all teachers do. I think that's quite a big myth. And obviously they do nothing in the summer holidays and have really long breaks. I think that's quite a big myth. And maybe a myth like teaching is easy, why can't everyone be a teacher? I think that's quite a big one as well.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? There's the kind of dual aspect where it's sort of, there's the perception of the huge workload on the one hand, but then also, it's sort of an easy ride and lots of holidays on the other, where it's kind of, you hear both sides of that. So Zaid, do you want to tackle a few of those and tell us what the reality is?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll try to go through one at a time. I'll start with the one about workload. I think it's quite accepted now. Anybody who's considering teaching that, there is a need for you to put in some time outside your contact with students. Obviously, there's a lot of duties, a lot of responsibilities that teachers have, in terms of preparing lessons, preparing resources, making sure assessment is kind of offered to students, and marking books, etc. So there definitely is a need for you to spend time, doing work outside the contact that you have with students. The question is, how do you accommodate that? How does that work? So in my career, I can talk about my own kind of experiences with that. What I used to do is I would allocate at least 2 hours per day outside contact with students. And I found what worked best for me was early mornings. So I used to tend to get into work about at least 2 hours before the students would arrive, because obviously I'm full of energy in the morning. I'm not exhausted by a full day of teaching. And generally, you'll find that the morning's school day is quite quiet. There's not a lot of students around, and not a lot of staff members around. So I was able to use that time to do any planning that I needed to do, any photocopying that I needed to do, any emails, any urgent requests that I needed to respond to, any pastoral issues that were raised in the day before that I needed to kind of action. any printing that needed to be done, and more importantly, any marking that needed to be done. And what I found was if I allocated them 2 hours typically on every working day, I never felt the need to spend time in the afternoons or the evenings doing additional work, and I never kind of felt overwhelmed. Now, the reality is there's going to be times in the academic year where you're probably going to have more to do than at other times. Um, there's times where there's coursework that needs to be submitted, or you'll have your students going for examinations, and there might be a requirement to do extra classes, extra revision opportunities for students. But typically speaking, I found that if I spent that time and maybe a few hours on a Sunday morning, any requirements that I need to do to do the job effectively, I was able to fit into them times. I think the issue with workload when it becomes a problem is when that due resource is not kind of afforded. So people don't allocate that set amount of time. You're not organized in that way, and then things get to pile up, and then you find that you're pretty overwhelmed. Probably the biggest demand of my time outside of teaching would have been marking books, and that's why I made it a habit. At least an hour a day I will be sitting marking books, and if you cycle through your books every week, every 2 weeks, you generally find that when you do come to mark them, there's actually not a lot of marking that needs to be done. But if you leave them same books for say a month, 6 weeks, then it becomes quite demanding. The last point I'll make about workload is when you start teaching, your first year is probably going to be the first time that you'll have an opportunity to go through the entire year's work with each year group. The training year, it doesn't really allow you that, because when you train to become a teacher, you have to do 2 placements as a minimum, and they tend to be at 2 different schools, so you don't really get an opportunity to go through the entire year's curriculum with students. But when you start working, obviously that opportunity is afforded to you. The first time you teach something, you're really conscious about what you're teaching, what resources are available, what activities you'll include in your lessons. But once you get your first year through, when you teach the same material the second year, a lot of the things that you need to prepare are already prepared. So you save a lot of time as you develop experience. So definitely the initial part of your career is going to probably have a greater demand on you. But as you get more and more experience, you'll find that the things that you were spending a lot of time in, say, your early career, you're no longer having to spend that time, because firstly, you become more efficient, and secondly, you've developed a good resource bank. So that's been my experience, I'd say, on workload. And I think, Freya, the other point that you mentioned was overworked and underpaid.
Yeah, you kind of hear that when teachers are striking on the news, and that's the one thing that everyone keeps saying on the news and stuff. So yeah.
So, I mean, there's been some changes that have been introduced around pay. So last year was the first year that teachers that started teaching as newly qualified teachers, the start salary was introduced at £28,000, which is a significant increase to previous years. Now, obviously, that's different if you were working in London, because obviously the cost of living is higher there. So the starting salary there is £34,000. Now, just to give you some figures, I mean, that can increase for a normal teacher. You can go from £28,000 to about, just around your £50,000 mark just for being a normal classroom teacher. That's somebody who has no additional responsibilities. They're just working, with the students that they teach. The other thing that I'll probably mention around teaching is there's a lot of promotional opportunities that kind of are afforded. So if you just take a moment to think about how many schools there might be where you live, in each of those schools you need to have heads of departments, heads of years, you'll have members of leadership. And in all of these positions, what you find is there's additional kind of pay that's offered. So there's a lot of promotional opportunities. If you look at teaching as a career, I think it's quite competitive now. So certainly the pay, I think, has improved quite healthily. And there's probably, more opportunities for progression in teaching than, say, most similar kinds of professions. So in terms of being underpaid, I think that's, not true when you compare it to a lot of other graduate kind of careers that people can go into. the last thing that I'll probably say on the underpaid part is teaching. I don't think is a career that most people consider solely for pay. I think it's not something that a lot of people will go into thinking, oh, I'm going to go into teacher because I want to make a lot of money. I think there's a lot more behind that decision. There's a passion, there's a kind of a commitment, there's a desire of probably making a difference that kind of is associated with choosing a career in teaching. So, just to summarize, I think it is a competitively paid profession, and there's probably something more that will attract people to teaching other than the pay.
Oh, that's a great insight. Thanks. Is there any particular aspects of that, Freya, that you wanted to come back on, or was that?
No, it's very reassuring, if anything. I think for me, the passion is at the forefront of everything, especially within teaching as well. So, yeah, it's definitely busted that myth for sure. Yeah.
Excellent.
Can I? Sorry, Dan. Can I just come back? I just wanted to comment on the holidays as well. I didn't.
Oh yeah,
of
course.
So my first holiday experience worked about, I think it was 7 weeks, 8 weeks. I was going for my first half-term holiday. I had a box of books that was so kind of high that I was barely able to see the top of them. I remember the look on the science technician's face, like, what on earth are you doing taking that home with you? And I was like, well, when else was I meant to get it done? And again, I'll come back to my initial kind of points. Look, when you're in your first year, you're learning how to do things. So you're probably going to find yourselves in situations where there is a lot to get done. But I was able to mark them books. I know it sounds like a lot, but I was able to do it in 2 days. We have a total of 9 days if you include the weekend, so I was still able to have a holiday. But the truth around the summer holidays is I don't think there's been a summer holiday that would have ever worked. Part of my holidays I might have used for a bit of marking, but at most it might be two days. Beyond that, you do get to rest in the holidays.
Good to know. So should we move on to the next issue, which is, and this is something that's actually come up in our surveys that we've done at Prospects when we asked people about their perceptions of careers in teaching, which is perhaps being put off a little bit by being unsure as to how they would deal with bad behaviour and those kind of issues in the classroom. Freya, what's your perception of that part of the role?
Yeah, I definitely think it's quite a big worry for someone who's, looking to get into teaching. One day you're just going to be in charge of like 30 plus students and you have to control them all. And I kind of got a little bit of an insight into it. So in Nottingham, I've had a job in 2 schools, just gaining like work experience and stuff. And like Zaid said, like working in some like deprived areas, that the students can be very challenging sometimes. So I have experienced it front hand, but me sitting at the back of the classroom being an observer, that was intimidating, let alone being the teacher at the front having to control all the students. And I think it's really hard to like obviously keep that consistency for all the teachers across the school, looking at behaviour policies and stuff. I do think that there is quite a big taboo around not controlling a class and wanting to keep it professional and stuff. So yeah, I think if anything it's quite daunting to someone like myself at the moment.
Yeah. Zaid, what would be your response to that? How have you managed bad behaviour in the class, and how do you approach that as part of the job?
So I think it's a very kind of valid concern that a lot of people have. I can relate to my own experiences going into teaching. If anything, it was a concern that I had. If there's anything that I've learned in my career around behaviour is, it's a skill set. It's a skill set that you develop through your training year, and something that you will obviously continue to develop in your career. There's a number of different aspects of this that I hope to try to cover, and please bear with me on this because I want to try to cover them all. The first is, when it comes to looking at behavior, there's quite a number of terms that I used. One of them is, it's called behavior for learning. It's about creating opportunities where behavior is not an issue. One of the biggest things that I'll say is most behavior management or behavior for learning is about preventing instances where negative behavior can occur. And there's a whole kind of, a number of skills or a number of qualities that you will kind of bring into that. So as an example, if lessons are planned where students are engaged, they're at an appropriate level, students are enjoying the learning, that and they're able to access that learning, and if they engage with that learning, then the likelihood of them being idle and disengaged, which generally then tends to lead on negative behavior, would be minimal. So once you develop that relationship with students, once you're able to kind of plan lessons and capture their interest and get them motivated around your subject, you'll find that they'll probably come into your lessons eager to learn, wanting to learn, and that idle negative behavior doesn't really really happen. Every school that you might choose to work in will have a policy. The policy is there to obviously keep students focused and to keep staff safe. As a teacher, you'll be encouraged to follow that policy. It's about creating awareness of that policy, and then to continually go refer back to that policy when students are probably not doing as the policy suggests. And it's also about not being confrontational with students, not challenging students, but giving them options. And this is where I think it's key, where students understand what is expected of them. And if they deviate from that expectation, it's a case of just reminding them of what is expected of them, and then giving them a choice. Look, you can either choose to do this, or if you don't, then you know what the consequence is. So it's not a confrontation between, say, the staff member and the student. It's more just a reminder of what is expected and what needs to be done in order to kind of avoid sanctions that might be in place. But the most significant thing that I think I can mention here is, look, behavior for learning is a skill set that you have to give yourself time to develop. And to give an example, when I first started teaching, I think my first lesson took me about 6 hours to plan. And that's not because it was something that was very difficult for me. It was something that I felt at the time that wasn't sufficient, and I kept on racing in my head thinking, oh, well, what if somebody asked me this, or what if somebody asked me the other? And I was adding and adding to this lesson plan, and when I showed it to my mentor, he was just, he just started chuckling, saying, "You've got enough here for 2 months. What do you mean you've not planned enough?" And you just overdo it because you're thinking so much. Fast forward a few weeks, that 6 hours became maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Fast forward a little, a little more, and then maybe that 20, 30 minutes became 5 to 10 minutes. The point I'm making is I developed a capacity and an ability to plan quickly. I understood what was required of me, and I was able to, I had resources that I was able to go to get that planning done. And I think the same applies for behavior for learning. It's a skill set, it's something that you learn, and it's something that you have to give yourself an opportunity to kind of develop. I also think, and certainly from my experiences, is probably the one aspect of teaching where you probably are less forgiving of yourself. So if you had a lesson where, things didn't go to plan and students were misbehaving, you probably take it hard on yourself. Oh, I can't do this. It's too hard. They just don't listen to me. But I think it's about being reflective. I think it's about going back to the drawing board, thinking about, why the lesson perhaps didn't go according to what you wanted to go as, what you could have done differently, how would you tackle that negative behavior in hindsight. Refer to colleagues, go back to the policies, go back to the drawing board, and try again. And just remember, with practice and with opportunities, you'll develop your skills to become an effective behavior practitioner as well. The most important bit of advice I can give to anybody listening and who's concerned about this is be easy on yourself. Don't be hard on yourself when things don't go right when it comes to behavior for learning. Just as if you overplan the lesson, you probably chuckle it off and say, look, I'll have another go, and I know not to plan as much. And the last thing, if I can add, is I think when you're an experienced teacher in a school setting, students tend to understand a lot more about the limitations around when they're in your class. So they know what you're about. They know that if they were to do X, Y, and Z, what the consequences would be. And you have a bit of a reputation, don't you, as teachers? And if you think back to your own experiences when you might have been in school, there were some teachers that you wouldn't want to mess around with as much as, say, as others, right? When I took my last teaching job, I taught in the previous school for about 4 years. I had absolutely no behavioral issues at all. Nothing at all. But when I took the last job that I was in, I had year 11s walk out of my room, run down the corridor. I had year 9s that would come in and start throwing things at each other. I had year 9s that wouldn't sit down, and I'm like, what on earth has happened? And I realized that, look, it's nothing to do with me. It could have been me. It could have been any other teacher. The fact is the students don't know, and they're testing the water. And, it's just a case of applying the behavior policies. I had to phone a few parents, I had a few meetings. And then once the students understood that, look, they can't get away with that kind of behavior, everything fell back into place as I was, accustomed to in my previous employment. So again, I'll go over the point. Sometimes you have to establish positive learning environments, and that takes a bit of time when the students get to know you. And there's always a policy to follow in which you're going to be safe, and it's just a case of practice and experience that will make it better as time goes.
Well, that's all really interesting, and I think that also just emphasises, Freya, doesn't it, the importance of speaking to people like Zaid who have the experience to sort of reassure you about these aspects of the career.
Oh yes, definitely. Getting those insights from the people that have got those years of experience, definitely. Yeah, it's really good.
And turning sort of away from myths and perceptions and more into now, what really attracts you to teaching, Freya? What is it that has made you want to pursue this career, and what do you expect the most rewarding parts of the job to be for you?
So for me, like as I said before, I'm hoping to become a geography teacher, and it's a bit ironic because I actually hated geography in school. I don't know what it was, and then I did it at A level because it was one of my decent GCSE grades, and I was like, I'm just going to do it. And then suddenly something, I don't know what it was, it just clicked, and I just fell in love with the subject. And for me, the main reason was because of my teacher. I think at A level, you're in a smaller classroom, you're getting to know your teachers one-on-one. I just absolutely loved it. And then I'd never ever thought that I'd be studying at a university. I'm in my third year now. I literally graduate this summer. And, for me, that was because of my teachers. My teacher was the first one on results day to come up to me and say, like, Freya, you've got into uni, and it was just that moment where it was like, I know how much value like teachers give to students like myself. And I've, as I said before, I've had 2 jobs in a school in Nottingham, and even me being on a placement there for 10 weeks, seeing that light bulb moment for one of those students, even though I've known them for less than a month, and it's like seeing them, how happy they are when they understand something, and it's so rewarding to think, oh, I was part of that. Only just had like a glimpse into what the teaching profession is like, but it's made me so excited to start next year. So definitely think the most rewarding part is, giving back to those students and seeing them have that light bulb moment like I did myself. So yeah.
Fantastic. And how about you, Zaid? How does that compare with what you found most rewarding as a teacher?
I think a lot of what Freya has said there is very, very true for my own experiences as well. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about teaching, just on the day-to-day thing, is I found it to be very kind of exciting and non-repetitive. And I know you're teaching lessons and you're teaching through a curriculum, but I think children and students generally are very uninhibited how they're feeling and what they're feeling, and they're very authentic in that regard. So I always found the day to be quite enjoyable, quite fun, quite engaging, quite lively with the students, and I really enjoyed that back and forth. And as Freya said, when students get something that they've struggled to understand, or when they realize that you actually do care and that you don't think they're just going to fail because they're in a bottom set, and you actually do put in quite a lot of effort to see them kind of have opportunities within your subject. One particular example that stands out for me is I once worked in a school where I inherited a year 9 class, and their behavior was very poor to begin with, and it was a big class. And when I started teaching them, one of the things they would constantly remind me of was the fact in year 8 they had supply teachers throughout the year, and each supply teacher that they had told them that they're not going to leave and they're going to be their teacher, and that they're going to be different. But every single one of them left within 6 to 8 weeks. And so when I came along and I said, no, I'm going to be your teacher for year 9, they had this belief that I wasn't going to last until past 2 months. So my approach with them was very similar to any other class I taught. I planned lessons for them as if they were my top set. I gave them lots of opportunities in practical science. If they failed to understand something, I always went back and explained again. I didn't just give them worksheets. I tried to make their lessons meaningful. And I think it was one afternoon I was just dreading the fact that, oh God, I've got year 9 and it's the afternoon and it's after lunch and it's like a Monday and it's a long day, and they just came in, and I was expecting a lot of racket and a lot of messing around and a lot of banter, but I had none of it. They just came in, they sat down, they got their books out. I was so surprised, but I didn't want to just say something in case they reverted back to how they've been the past 2 weeks. And then the teaching assistant said, because she's been with them the year before, and she basically said that they've never experienced what you've done for them, in that you've planning lessons where they're actually able to do practicals, and when they tell you they don't understand, you don't say, well, I've explained it before. You go through the trouble of explaining it again. And I think it got to a point where they appreciated that, and they realized that maybe I did care about them. And their behavior changed completely, and it became one of the classes that I look forward to, because they were so engaged after that point. So I think it's that excitement. It's the fact that you're able to make a difference to young people. You can give them opportunities, and you get them to kind of take certain directions. So I still live close to the school that I taught in when I first taught became a teacher, and I see some of my students now, and they're all grown up and they're married, most of them, and they've got their children, and some of them are earning far more money than I ever earned. But it's good to see that, and they come and they tell us, oh, how meaningful that was, and they still refer to me as the best science teacher, and it's really nice to see. So it's very rewarding. It's very fulfilling in that regard, and you'll never feel bored on the job. There's always something happening, and it tends to be very unique.
It's great to hear those stories as well. Let's move on to talk a little bit about your current roles. We'll start with you, Freya. Tell us about being an ambassador for Get Into Teaching, and what you've learned about the profession by carrying out that role.
Yeah, so as part of the being a brand ambassador, we have to do social media engagement. So we've got content every week to post to our followers and stuff. And even just the posts that they make, and like the links they give to stories about teachers and stuff, and reading all that is just so inspiring to hear everyone's individual story. I think that's really important to help share that as well. As part of the brand ambassador role, we've attended webinars and stuff to learn a bit more, because obviously when we host these events, we're having to inform students, and we want to make sure we answer all their questions as well as we can. So I've learned a lot about the different routes into teaching. So I'm taking the university route. I just think that was best for me, but I did look into the school-centered initial teacher training. So balancing those options was really interesting to learn about what worked for me, what didn't work for me. And obviously a big one is the funding. So the bursaries for next year, that's really important. I think a lot of people don't realise the funding that's out there for certain subjects. So yeah, it's really important. And I think the best thing I probably learned was probably, how learning how progressive the role of being a teacher is. Like Zaid said before, it's not just about teaching classroom. You can reach those targets of becoming a head of year, head of subject, and I think that's really, quite cool to like keep me motivated. And yeah, I'm really excited to just get started, really. But yeah, the role has been really good to learn more, meet people like Zaid, and talk to like-minded people. So yeah, it's been really good.
Fantastic. And Zaid, how about you? What you're an Explore Teaching advisor. So tell us a bit about what an advisor does and how you support people on their journey into teaching.
Firstly, thank you, Freya, for your kind words. It's really nice of you to mention that. So, as an Explore Teaching advisor, essentially what my role is to help anybody who's considering teaching with any aspect that's related to getting onto a teacher training course. So it doesn't really matter what stage of their journey they might be. Some people might be quite advanced and they've done quite a lot of stuff, in terms of preparing for that, and other people might be just at the point of considering teaching as a career. But anything that might entail, we are at hand to offer advice and support. So if somebody just joins us, one of the first conversations we'll have is, why they're considering teaching, what their motivations might be. The reason for that is it's something that's quite heavily looked at when you make your teacher training application, your motivations for going into teaching. So just to have a conversation around that, looking at eligibility, trying to understand what the profession involves. If there's somebody who might be interested in securing some experience in a school so they can learn more about the profession that way, then that's something that we can offer them opportunities and help them secure. There's a lot of information around, how you can train to become a teacher, because, some of the differences are quite subtle. We are at hand of, going through the different ways and helping people find training providers that might offer a style of training that they might be interested in. And we also have other advisory services that then go further to help with the application process. So things like looking at the personal statement, preparing for interviews, doing a mock interview, preparing for any task that might be asked at an interview, etc. So, just to summarize, any stage of considering teacher training, we are there at hand to help. We are a free service. We don't charge for any of what we do, and every advisor on our team is an experienced teacher. The experience ranges from being classroom teachers all the way to being head teachers. So we have a lot of experience there, and of course within that, different subjects have been taught as well. So it's essentially having one-to-one consultancy. It's not costing you anything, and anything that is applicable to you, even if you're unaware of it, we are there to help. To give example, some people might have a degree in one subject area, but they're considering to teach a different subject. Can I do it? How can I get help with upskilling my or updating my subject knowledge, etc. These are opportunities that obviously we are there to help with and to offer people advice on what opportunities that they can pursue.
That sounds comprehensive. So, and what's the best way for someone to get in touch with an advisor if that's what they want to do?
Search Get Into Teaching. So if you were to put it into, say, Google as an example, it will be your first hit. It'll be Get Into Teaching, and when you go onto the website, on the very first page there will be some information about the advisor registration. There's actually 3 advisory services. Once you fill in the initial questions, I think there's about 5 questions that you have to fill in. When you fill in the questions, the appropriate advisory service will be allocated to you. You'll then get an email from your advisor who will look to set up an initial call just to go through where you're at and what you want to do. And then obviously from that point, they'll suggest a bit of an action plan. And then the relationship continues. You'll probably get in contact every 4, 6, 8 weeks, depending on when you're looking to train. And they will offer you kind of advice of steps. And obviously, if you've been successful in looking at some of them steps, then they'll suggest other steps for you to consider as well. So yeah, just go Get Into Teaching. You'll be able to register for an advisor through the links there.
Brilliant. Well, that's been an amazing overview. I'll just want to finish by asking you both if you can sum up your feelings about teaching or what you believe teaching to be in a word or two. Freya, do you want to go first?
Obviously, we've touched on the word rewarding quite a lot throughout this podcast, but yeah, definitely rewarding. I'm just so excited to get started, really. So yeah.
Brilliant. And Zaid, how about you? One word.
Bit of an interesting one, Dan. I think
Okay.
for me it will be inspiring because, my experience has been I've gone into this profession just because I had no real other option at the time, but it's inspired me to do a lot more. It's taught me a lot about myself, and it's humbled me in many ways. So yeah, it's a career that's inspired me to do other things, and it's been very rewarding, not just for the students that I think I've taught, but also for myself. And it's helped me learn a lot about young people because you forget as you grow, don't you?
Absolutely. And I'm sure many listeners to this will have been inspired as well by hearing both of your perspectives on careers in teaching. So thanks very much, both of you, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks once more to Zaid and Freya for that really illuminating discussion. And as Zaid mentioned a little bit earlier, if you do want to find out more, just search for Get Into Teaching and you'll see the website there. Alternatively, there's a link in the episode description as well. For more careers advice, including lots of resources on getting into teaching, head over to prospects.ac.uk. You can find and follow Future You on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and get in touch with comments, feedback, or suggestions by emailing podcast@prospects.ac.uk. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.